Paul Henley with NewsHour, live from the BBC, and we're going to return now to the White House's efforts to use Afghan government assets, banked in New York, to pay compensation to victims of 9/11. I've been speaking to a lawyer in the US, representing around 150 relatives of those who were killed more than 20 years ago. Andrew Maloney told me why he thought Afghan national assets of today were fair game in the historic legal cases he was pursuing.
The 9/11 attacks were perpetrated by Al-Qaeda, which was hosted by the Taliban in Afghanistan from 1996 through beyond September 11, 2001. Without the Taliban's help and Afghanistan's help of Al-Qaeda and bin Laden, they never would have been able to launch worldwide attacks, including the 9/11 attack. So the Taliban is directly responsible as a co-conspirator, an aider and abetter of the 9/11 attacks.
But look, the legal case has huge holes in it, given that there is still no evidence that any Afghans, Taliban or other, were directly involved in the 9/11 attack.
You're mistaken about that. Legally, the Taliban was definitely involved in supporting bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. In fact, even after 9/11, they protected them from the United States when we asked that they turn them over. They said, no, he's our friend, our brother, and we're not turning him over, then we invaded.
That's actually disputed by lots in Afghanistan. Why are you not going after the Saudis for this money?
We are going after the Saudis. It's a long road, and we're still going after the Saudis. But the Taliban is definitely part of the aiding and abetting of 9/11. There's no question about that. The question you asked is actually probably the more important and pertinent question. The legal issue is, whose money is the $7 billion? Is it Afghanistan's? Is it the Taliban? Is the Taliban Afghanistan? So that is the question of the day, frankly, and that is one that was being disputed. And the United States government was due today to file something with the court in our case to let the court know what they wanted to do with the money.
But despite what you say, the Taliban themselves might have tolerated the presence of bin Laden on Afghan territory. They were not part of the planning process or the perpetration of the 9/11 attacks.
So if you support a terror organization knowing that their main mission and goal is to kill and murder Americans, including in the United States, but anywhere in the world, you know that that's their mission, their goal, and you give them housing, you give them camps to train.
Peter's going to be hanging out with us in about 7 minutes, folks.
Do you think that there's no responsibility on the part of the Taliban for that?
What about
just to go into the last half hour with you all?
Huge need for those in Afghanistan now who are starving, that the country urgently needs those assets more than your clients do.
We do recognize that. My clients do recognize the Afghan people, most of whom are innocent, are starving, and they're under this regime, under the Taliban, and they need food, they need all kinds of things. And that is why I think President Biden, and we have said, some of the money should go to help the Afghan people or East Afghan refugees, but some should go to the 9/11 family so that some measure of justice is served. If the Taliban's back in power, they're going to have to face the music on what they did 20 years ago. Now, the reality is the Afghan people did not stand up to the Taliban when they had an opportunity. The U.S., the British, Europeans were in Afghanistan for 20 years, spent trillions of dollars, thousands of soldiers killed. The Afghan people knew eventually we were going to leave. We helped them set up a government. We supplied their military and their police with weapons and arms. And when we left, they just turned around and handed it to the Taliban. They bear some responsibility for the condition they're in. I don't necessarily mean every single Afghan citizen, but as a country, as a people, they bear some responsibility for allowing the Taliban back in.
We've talked to an Afghan citizen who says the U.S. should be compensating his people for the havoc that has been wreaked on Afghanistan as a result of decisions made in Washington. What do you say to him?
I'd say you should have not allowed the Taliban to host a terror group whose mission was to attack the United States. Knowing they're going to launch attacks against America, America is going to respond every time, and we did. And so for the average Afghan person to not understand that, or to not try to convince the Taliban or overthrow the Taliban to get rid of them, they've got blood on their hands.
Do you think you'll get this money?
I hope so. I think half of it, that President Biden has said, is going to go to the victims. There's a dispute over which victims, and that's something I don't think the president intended, and something the court may have to deal with. We don't think that families should fight each other, who got there first or whatever. We think it should be fairly distributed. There were almost 3,000 people killed that day. And so even though it sounds like a lot of money, when you divide it up, not as much as you think. But I'm optimistic that the right thing will be done for the victims, and the other half of the money, the right thing will be done for the Afghan people to help them, but not the Taliban.
That was U.S. lawyer Andrew Maloney. This is NewsHour. Ethiopia's civil war has left a humanitarian crisis in its wake. The fighting between government forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, who've aligned with other rebel groups, has killed thousands and driven 400,000 people into famine. The UN has accused all sides of war crimes and atrocities. In recent months, even the country's capital looked as though it could fall to the rebels. The BBC's Africa correspondent, Catherine Biaruhanga, reports from Addis Ababa now on the human price of this conflict through the voices of the civilians caught up in it.
The small hamlet of Hammasit lies in the valleys of Ethiopia's northern highlands. In August last year, Hammasit in the Amhara region was drawn into this country's brutal civil war when rebels from the neighboring Tigray region invaded as they marched towards the capital.
This is where the shells came. Shrapnel was everywhere. It was hard to pick up everything.
60-year-old Mulay Birava shows us the battlefield. He and his neighbors tried to bury the dead, but they couldn't keep up with the pace of death. Bodies remain in the trenches, fields and forests. 300 kilometers to the east of Hammasit is Waldia. It too was briefly occupied by the TPLF rebels. 24-year-old Melat Wendata makes a living serving coffee by the roadside. She says her husband was kidnapped by the TPLF and now struggles to explain his whereabouts to their 7-year-old daughter.
She always tells me she sees her father in her dreams. She tells me that he plays with her. Some of the fighters tell me he could be dead already. I looked for him even in graveyards, hoping to find a piece of his clothing. But so far, I haven't found anything.
Tigray's rebels deny targeting civilians. They've pulled their forces out of Amhara, pushed back by the government. These villagers say their houses have been hit by these chunks of metal, drones made in China, Iran and Turkey, which gave federal forces the upper hand. But civilians have been killed and homes destroyed, like the one belonging to Sheikh Awal Hussein Ahmed.
There was a military truck and artillery parked behind our house. When the drone struck those targets, our house got burned along with it. So peace may mean we can access food again, but we have lost everything. We have no place to live.
The government says it only targets rebel equipment and infrastructure with drone strikes. Here in the capital, the government claims to have defeated Tigray rebels by pushing them back to their territory. But the truth is, this is a difficult war for either side to win. And now there are murmurings of a possible ceasefire. I've come to meet Ambassador Dina Mufti. He's the spokesperson for the Foreign Affairs Ministry.
It's not in the interest of Ethiopia to continue the war. The government has already initiated all-inclusive dialogue. The terrorist organizations, those elements could be dealt with separately.
Conversations about possible talks mark a shift in this 15-month conflict. But this is still a fragile moment and an opportunity that should not be lost.
Catherine Biaruhanga reporting from the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. This is the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, stepping into a Parisian studio that offers space and support for refugee artists.
I'm Ahlam Jahran. This is a building I know really well, the Atelier des Artistes en Exil. There are musicians performing, dancers rehearsing, and visual artists like me showing our work. Every year I've had the chance to exhibit my work. It's really important because when I came here, all my network was just gone. We help artists in the administrative way, linguistic way, and psychological way too.
We all had to run from a terrible political situation that would have gotten us tortured or killed or arrested.
You're discovering human stories in this place, discovering cultures. I see many things about The media didn't show it usually. I could not imagine this journey without them.
Atelier for Exiles, Monday at 10 GMT.
Coming up on NewsHour in the next 30 minutes, the latest on the Canadian anti-vaccine demonstrations. We hear about a legal route for the US to prosecute those involved in doping the 15-year-old Russian Olympic figure skater, and Belarus's opposition leader on the Russian troops now stationed in her country. Will come after the news.
BBC News with Stuart McIntosh. The White House says Russia is ready to attack Ukraine at any time, but it doesn't believe the final decision has been taken. The administration said the operation would begin with air attacks and that all US citizens should leave Ukraine within the next 48 hours. The White House said an assault would be met with unity, ultimately backfire on Russia. President Biden has ordered half of the Afghan government assets frozen in the US to be used for humanitarian aid in the country. The other half of the funds is being held for settling the claims filed against the Taliban over their role in the 9/11 attacks. A state of emergency has been declared in the Canadian province of Ontario, where truck drivers opposed to COVID measures have blocked key crossings to the US. Just one of them carries hundreds of millions of dollars worth of trade every day. A major operation to capture one of Brazil's most important drug lords, Chico Bento, has failed for the second time in a month. The raid was part of efforts to end the power of criminal gangs. Brazilian officials say January was the worst month on record for deforestation in the Amazon. The country's space agency estimates more than 400 square kilometers of forest were lost, 5 times as much as in January last year. Demonstrations have continued for the 5th day in a row in the southern Syrian city of Sweden, with people demanding better living conditions. Thousands had earlier been denied access to subsidized food and oil. Such protests are rare in government-held areas. 10 tons of medicines and equipment have been flown to Tigray. The northern Ethiopian region is controlled by rebels fighting the government. Reports speak of severe shortages of essential medicines. And that's our look at the BBC News.
Welcome back to NewsHour. In Canada, Ontario province has declared a state of emergency and threatened to fine and jail protesters who've been blocking a key US trade corridor for 4 days now. Hackers, angered by coronavirus mandates, began occupying the Canadian capital, Ottawa, last month before crowding dozens of vehicles near a bridge in Ontario, which is North America's busiest border crossing. To get the latest, we speak now live to Karen Pauls, who's national reporter at CBC. Hello, Karen. Why has Ontario declared this state of emergency? How bad are things?
Well, as you know, the 2 main protests are in the nation's capital, Ottawa, where they're expecting even more people over the weekend, and police are gearing up for that. And also on that busiest crossing to the U.S., the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor. It's been closed all week, although protesters did open one lane today. And court is hearing an application by automakers for an injunction to end that blockade because it's really hurt their production. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has convened cabinet to urgently enact orders to punish those who block and impede the movement of goods, of people, and services along that critical infrastructure. And he's saying there could be fines of $100,000 and also up to 1 year of imprisonment. Now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just had a news conference a little while ago where he threatened how much the protests are endangering jobs and threatening the economy and public safety. He said the blockades have to end, the border cannot and will not remain closed, although he wouldn't say how or when that might happen. But he did talk about his meeting this morning with U.S. President Biden. They discussed how international actors have become involved in this, both because foreign money is being used to fund some of this illegal activity, and there was also an attack on Ottawa's 911 system, that's the emergency system, from the U.S.